Hello, everybody. This is Sanjay Swamy here. Welcome again to a new episode of the Prime Venture Partners podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories with people from the startup ecosystem. Today, we have a privilege of having a very special guest, someone who from the startup ecosystem now runs one of the most important organizations in India, the National Payments Corporation of India. My guest today is the CEO of the NPCI, Dilip Asbe. Dilip, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sanjay.
So, Dilip, I'm sure a lot of people on the show use NPCI products across the board, whether it comes to UPI, of course, as well as several other platforms from NPCI. It would be helpful if you could start perhaps a little bit by talking about NPCI and its charter and its origins. Of course, I think very few people also realize that you're a CTO of a startup, and that's how you and then you moved over to CTO of NPCI, and so it'd be great to also hear a little bit about your background as well.
So, Sanjay, let me start the genesis of NPCI. And the genesis of NPCI starts, there were two thought processes when the discussion on having a umbrella institution for retail payments to be started. And one reason was, RBI was doing a lot of operational work on payment system. And being a regulator, they thought that the operational work has to be done by some independent, separate entity. And the second thought process, and that time the China Union Pay was already formed. And if the China can have its own card compared to, facing up Visa and MasterCard, the thought process was, why not India? We were the neck to neck on looking up to China on most of the things. So why not in payment systems? So these were the two things why, everybody started thinking that there needs to be NPCI. RBI created this entity. And RBI asked Indian Banking Association that time to take a lead to start this organization. So top 10 banks in the country started this institution. Obviously, this is a not-for-profit organization. What it means is it can make the profits, but it has to plow back the profits into the innovations, the data center, the research, or those kind of things, what we are doing. But obviously not give any dividends back to the shareholder. When the NPCI was coming up, and then finance minister had actually given the commitment to the parliament that this is going to be a public good, this is going to be a public utility, and going to be important for the innovation in the retail payments organization. When you look at, and when the RBI started in building this institution, RBI sent its one of the core payments person, Mr. Hota, who used to lead the payment system, to be CEO in charge. And a lot of banks who are participating in NPCI equity shareholding, sent a lot of people initially. And that's how this whole institution started. And I must say that when the NPCI started, and I give a lot of credit back to RBI, is RBI looked upon one important thing that, RBI, while hiving off RBI's own operated payment systems, such as check truncation, the electronic clearing, as well as the national financial switch, the RBI looked into that, this institution is day zero onwards self-sufficient, right? And RBI also did one more thing that, RBI requested Narayan Murthy to be first chairman of this institution. And I think that put up a very solid foundation for this organization. And we kept on building over, in that sense, because he provided a valuable guidance to the institution. And he's like a gold standard on institution building. He was very clear right in the beginning that NPCI has to be self-sufficient from day zero. You can't go back and ask money to anybody. You have to earn your money. You have to innovate. You have to... So a lot of things, a lot of value add in the initial building blocks. And I think a lot of credit goes back to RBI, Sanjay, to build this entity and the top 10 banks to selflessly put up money, put up resources to build up this entity. This is the starting point of NPCI.
Got it. So if you fast forward to today, for the names that consumers would recognize beyond, say, UPI, right? What comes under the scope of platforms that NPCI develops and runs, and the various networks and so on?
So we operate a check clearing system, but that is on behalf of RBI. RBI still is a owner of the payment system, the operating guidelines, and we are the operators. We also operate some of the other payment systems like the FASTag. Again, we operate that system, which is the electronic tolling system. We operate that on behalf of NHAI and the Ministry of Road and Transport. We operate IMPS, which is actually, this is how the whole genesis of UPI started, which is one of the first of its kind real-time payment systems in the world. And we also do RuPay cards. RuPay cards is our RuPay is our flagship product. We started with a variety of different types of the cards, and I think very soon you will see a lot of action on RuPay, because we are investing very heavily on RuPay credit cards to gain as much popularity as debit cards have. So these are some of the platforms what we run. We also run a direct benefit transfer platform on behalf of government to transfer the subsidies back to. We work very closely with Aadhaar, Sanjay. I'm sure you're aware, and
Right.
I remember still that both of us were together in 2010 in Bangalore, where we did a first micro ATM transaction using Aadhaar, and all of us really did not think that this is going to be so vital for the well-being of our citizens. The payment systems what we worked with Aadhaar. And I think it has been a fantastic journey, Sanjay. Last 11, 12 years, 13 years, in fact, when we look back. And I think NPCI has been very, very fortunate to set up as a public good, because what happens is, a lot of support we get, right, from the ecosystem, whether it's Mr. Nilekani, whether it's government, whether it's RBI, whether it's bankers, whether it's fintechs, startups, founders. A lot of people actually are very... I must say that they are so keen that NPCI is successful, right? So we end up in getting a lot of credit, but I think ecosystem has contributed a lot, and ecosystem continues to contribute a lot in the success of the national institute like NPCI.
Terrific. So if you were to look at, and maybe we'll come back to that in a second. So broadly, you said the ATM networks, FASTag, check truncation, of course, IMPS, NEFT, all of these things, and then UPI, which is sort of built on a lot on top of IMPS and so on. So tell us a little bit about your background, right? Because yours is also, most people think that when it is a government sort of based institution, typically one comes from the BIS cadre or something like that. But you have a very startup industry background. So tell us, or certainly a tech background. Would love to hear about your background if you could share with the audience.
I'm a technology graduate. I did my engineering and joined working as a software in the software area. And I was in the US for a couple of years. Obviously, got bored, came back, and I met Mr. Lonnie Anthony, and he was starting the Euronet services in early 2002, and they were looking out for tech person. So I said, why not? And we started this Euronet. I was there for about 8 years with him, looking after the APAC region, the Middle East region for technology built out, especially for Euronet worldwide. And also we were running a global development center. So fairly deep thick into the tech, payment system tech, you can say that, but predominantly legacy tech in that sense. And then obviously when the NPCI was starting, I saw the opportunity, and I felt that my skill set would be important for this organization more from technology standpoint. And obviously NPCI was run by Mr. Hota then, and he was also kind enough to give me a job, and I started as a CTO of NPCI. So complete transition from the MNC culture to the very kind of a public entity, right? So fairly unheard of in that sense.
Right. No, and I think first of all, I think you could have had several opportunities in the private sector, in the startup ecosystem sector, especially payments has been such a big piece. But going and working there in a very pivotal role in defining the sort of technology to be in such a open, scalable manner, and the new age, which is something that we don't normally expect to have out of such an organization, and that has truly been transformative. And now, tell us the journey and the transition from CTO to CEO, right? And what does that mean for you, Dilip Asbe?
When I was CTO, obviously, while the technology was a prime job, and thanks to Mr. Hota as well, and And actually, this goes a little bit backwards, right? Working with Mr. Loney Anthony, Sanjay, if you recollect, we met in 2005, and thanks to him, he used to involve me a lot in terms of meeting customers, meeting the important people in payment systems like RBI, the IBA. So, he had actually helped me to get some lot of sense from the market standpoint, right? And in terms of building some early relationships in the market, and those were very, very helpful when I stepped into NPCI. And again, Mr. Hota gave again a lot of freedom to interact with the market, to design products, to work, to take ecosystem together, to while we design some of the things. So I think working with these two legendary individuals, helped me to have that customer focus, customer interaction right from the beginning. So while I was a CTO, supposed to be the fairly inward-looking job, thanks to these two gentlemen, I already had a great market. Then personally, I felt I need to do some management course. I looked at the London School of Economics. Again, Ms. Hota was very kind enough to let me go every quarter, 2 weeks to London to pursue this course. I completed the course in 2 years. And I think the CTO COO was fairly very similar, right? Because the NPCI has been extremely market-facing, customer-focused institution. And then obviously the CEO opportunity. But Sanjay, the way I look at this whole thing is, we are a 1.2 billion population country, and anybody there would be many better candidates, many good candidates can lead the role for NPCI. I think I find myself very fortunate to get this opportunity and deliver to at least reasonable expectations to the ecosystem, RBI, and the government.
Yeah, I think you're being very humble here, Dilip. I think it has been nothing short of spectacular from the transition, certainly at the time when you were CTO to over the last 5 years, because it's not like there was something that you were trying to emulate. You have created an organization which has solved problems that have been solved very differently from what was done anywhere else in the world, right? To have real-time interoperable retail payments at a scale which is also probably bigger than anything else in the rest of the world combined. So amazing work, and kudos to you and your team for having done that. It would be helpful if you could share some of the history of this, especially the UPI journey, which has just been I don't even think we could have scripted it as it has ended up so far. If you can talk about the origins of it, why it came about, some of the big moments like during demonetization with the launch of BHIM, for example, and then of course during COVID, how the scale up has happened, and what have been some of the challenges and surprises that NPCI had to overcome that as technologists we don't see from the outside.
So Sanjay, it's all started. We had Mr. Nilekani heading the UPI at that particular time. And since 2009 itself, NPCI was collaborating with UIDI in a big way, especially with Mr. Nilekani. That he was very clear that, the UIDI and NPCI are very similar organization. And fortunately, we started together. Exactly at the same time we started. So somewhere it was destined that, while Aadhaar could do its core job of authentication, KYC, and those services, Mr. Nilekani had early days envisaged that Aadhaar would be a payment address, the payment instrument, and payment authentication method for the payment ecosystem. So we kind of worked very closely with UIDI, and you remember those times when Rajesh Bansal was there, Viral was there, Pramod, Sanjay, Shrikant, and yourself, and all of us worked very closely, and we built up this Aadhaar and Aadhaar payments bridge, and as well as the Aadhaar enabled payment system, and which has been proven extremely valuable back asset for the country, because the lot of leakages has been. So what I'm saying, the reason why I'm explaining this is, we NPCI and UIDI started very innovative things, and which actually proved very valuable. And while this whole thing was stacking up, Mr. Nil, while we should have a lot of brainstorming conversations, me and NPCI team, Mr. Nilekani used to address our board a couple of times, and a lot of conversations were happening. And while we were running a lot of other payment systems like IMPS, RuPay, we were all thinking that, a lot of issues in IMPS. And let me tell you why, and we thought while IMPS is really, really successful, why it can't be exponential innovation, right? Because there was no pull. There were, IMPS needed a long address, IFSC code, and which very difficult for a human being to remember.
MMID.
A lot of complications, right? So then then when we started thinking about it, NPCI team, bankers were hugely involved, and this is how the whole UPI started. And whether it's a interoperability of the payment system, unbundling of the account and the front end service, UPI ID, the person to merchant payments, which was not part of IMPS, to be part of UPI from day zero. And thankfully, a lot of when you look at when Samir and Rahul was thinking of starting something, and they looked at this. And I remember somewhere in Yes Bank in early 2016, drawing up that how they can play a role, and we were trying to explain them. Similar conversations back with many other players, whether it's banks, whether it's other institutions, Paytm for that matter, or Google. So a lot of people came together, and I think that's what it created a very vibrant ecosystem, Sanjay. And when we were looking at, obviously initial challenges were very many, right? Because these kind of APIs were very new to the ecosystem. So stabilizing the tech stack, and from our side to bank side, has been a long journey in that sense. And when you look at the demonetization happened, and government decided, right? Prime Minister at that time decided that let's create a starter app, BHIM app, right? While obviously the app, the government didn't want, should not be doing this app business, or NPCI should not be doing this app business. But I think the Prime Minister thought that this will give a direction, right? This will give a signal to the ecosystem that if government can build an app for the payment system, why can't the others? And I think this kind of created a BHIM app launch, right? Because UPI had launched already. The BHIM app launch actually created a huge sensation back in the ecosystem, and actually galvanized the ecosystem to jump onto the UPI bandwagon, which was not really looked at it as a national priority. But I think the BHIM app created that national priority, and the Prime Minister actually met a lot of people that time, and pushed then Secretary. The entire bureaucracy was actually trying to work with the influence the private system to participate. So many challenges, but I think exciting journey, Sanjay, to start and see that where we are. Obviously, this doesn't happen by one person, one entity, one institution, right? It's an ecosystem effort, right? And ecosystem actually comprises back with a lot of vibrancy and a lot of enthusiasm. And I think RBI and government did a lot of work to create that enthusiasm about UPI. And I think we are grateful to both of them to even think that this kind of payment system can actually change the way payments being done, not only in the country but even worldwide.
So having said that, Dilip, over the years, right, and one of the nice things about UPI is actually, while there has been incremental stuff, the core architecture seems to have been something that we got right from the beginning, and it has, some of these things actually they should not change too much, right? That's why they're successful. But yet the scale has been incredible, right? I remember recently on my Twitter thing, I saw somebody retweeted the original photo that we had taken on the day of the launch of UPI in one of the hotels in Bangalore, which has Mr. Nilakani, you, I think Sharad, Pramod Verma, and myself, and a couple of other people. And, this is when we were envisioning the first transaction was going to happen. And today, less than 5 years later, we're doing several billion transactions a month, right? And you should certainly share the best numbers, the latest numbers. But along the way, it has grown sort of in orders of magnitude. How has the infrastructure of UPI had to sort of scale up, right? Because this is a scale that most startups actually will not see, right? Even at the highest of scales, we'll see 5,000 orders a minute and feel very feel that that's spectacular. But you're seeing the TPS is has grown exponentially, and clearly it's just been working very smoothly. It has scaled up very silently, right? So What has gone behind the scenes into your organization to make sure that it's always working?
Sanjay, I think when we started this, I think there were two important points I would like to highlight. One is, working with some of the finest architects like Pramod Verma, Mr. Nilekani, who have been our advisors. We kind of chartered the full open source journey in a big way, right? With the UPI and some of the other systems. So that has been really valuable because, I can't imagine at this scale, if we are using some of the licensed products, some of the closed loop architecture, whatever price we are able to afford to provide it back to the ecosystem, obviously this wouldn't have been possible. And also the scale, both. So I think this was one decision which I think was amazing, and I think we got graduated to this. I must say that we were not very friendly before, but with the open source. But I think this journey actually got us better, and it's still. I can't say that we are better, but we are still learning every day passing by. I think this open source journey, the open architecture, has been fairly beneficial for NPCI. The second important thing, Sanjay, that our board has been very clear that whatever NPCI must ensure that it does with highest efficiency, right? So the board has been very clear, and a lot of times we have done. When you look at last 3-4 years, we have done the restructuring of the organization. We have done run, grow, and transform so that run can actually run the UPI, grow can actually build the features, and transform form can actually look at the what comes after 2 years, 3 years down the line. So some of the things what we have done to deal with the challenges, obviously I can't say that it is still everything has been sorted out. In fact, we are working on now to make UPI work in the active mode across sites, and which we are hoping that next 3-4 months it will go live. Because I think the objective what board has laid out, the RBI has laid out, that UPI must give the highest resiliency what any payment system can give, and obviously the gold standard is never go down, right? So while IT systems keep giving the problem, you should figure out a way to recover, and a lot of work has been happening, Sanjay. Still it's happening on this, and I think the learning journey continues. That's what I can say.
That's fantastic. I have to say that as a payments industry person that has seen and tried to build these systems, the level of, I know there are times when people experience transactions not going through from in every now and then, but that is really because of the overload. It's not the system has gone down, right? So I think really amazing to see how reliable it has become, where we all broadly just assume it's there for us anymore, right? It is no longer a question of can this thing work, can it do, right? In fact, now the expectation is just that it's a utility, it's always there, and so it's really kudos to all of you for having done that. I'll switch gears a little bit, but before I get there, what is the scale today, right? If you were to talk to a CTO of one of our startups is listening to this, right, in the startup ecosystem, what are some of the numbers?
We are very close to 10,000 TPS now, transactions per second. And, obviously, Sanjay, you are aware that, when we actually were looking at, the traditional payment systems operate on a request response, right? One request, one response, standard processing. While UPI actually does 8 such interactions, right? UPI is not a request response system. It's a platform with a multiple interaction, right? We go back, resolve the address to the account. We actually go back and check the beneficiary. Bank is on. We do a lot of things, and I think 8 APIs are standard request response APIs compared to the one request response API of the traditional ATM or any other IMPS for that matter transaction. So when you look at 10,000 TPS transactions per second on this is actually like a 50-70,000 TPS is what we are operating right now. But Sanjay, when I look at this, when we looked at this load, and while number of times you mentioned a point that UPI, there are failures in UPI, because see what happens is number of times even the overall ecosystem has not sized, right? And the volumes are going with such a speed. It's always a catch-up game back to the ecosystem to put up the infrastructure, to put up the invest into 3x infrastructure ahead of time. But obviously, this can't be a reason. While UPI now everybody knows that it's an entire ecosystem job to give a seamless experience back to the user. UPI can't go down, right? Whether it's a NPCI side system, whether it's a bank side system, all of us might have to over-invest back into the infrastructure to ensure that the system is up and available back to the end consumer. So I think multiple of tens of thousand TPS is what is being processed right now.
That's incredible. It's incredible. So switching gears from tech side, right? And of course, I know there's a lot of work that goes into the compliance there, the certification, the reconciliation of transactions, that entire backend. I'm sure that there is a large team. How big is the team working on UPI alone in NPCI?
We have been very fortunate to get a committed team in UPI. In fact, the original guys who have built up UPI, you remember Satish and Anubhav, they are fortunately back with us and still heading up, going fairly strong. And I think the team is fairly committed to look at the challenges, because when you run such a high velocity system, high intensity system, there are multiple issues which keeps coming, and obviously the team has to be on the toes to deal with it. But I must say that so proud of NPCI team that never lets down the ecosystem. The team is always available, and I think we have been taught right from the beginning that we are there is always we are a service provider to this whole banking ecosystem. So as a service provider, we have to be ahead in the technology game. We have to be better than everybody else. So these all have been values which has been part of our team, and obviously the challenges would continue, and that's a journey. And but let me tell you, Sanjay, there is never a dull moment in NPCI.
Actually, I was just thinking through the earlier part of this conversation, and you mentioned some of the other systems. Then, even coming back to, if I look at FASTag, if I look at Bharat Bill system, the BBPS network, of course UPI, then there's RuPay, which is now launching both prepaid and credit cards, and then you have, of course, NEFT and RTGS and all these things. All of us as consumers and as SMEs, we interact with all these systems. I think it's just really quite fascinating to think about all these new things that have come about in the last 6-8 years, which have gone from zero to pretty large scale, and your team is managing them parallelly. Let's switch a little to business models, right? This whole topic of zero MDR has been much written about, much talked about. Certainly, it has been very, I would say, disruptive for companies in the sector that have had to figure out other ways of making money. And yet at the same time, has certainly, at least the belief is that it has eliminated any friction. And so digital payments have, become mainstream now. How should one think about, where the right steady state is, and where do you think we're going to end up here? Is this a long-term thing to stay? Is there going to be some change here?
The way I look at it, whether it's a UPI or a card payment system, as far as UPI is concerned, normally the P2P is free of cost to the customer, right? You can't charge the customer. Otherwise, this adoption in UPI would go for a 6. And when you look at it at a high level, the P2M actually funds the entire UPI ecosystem, the P2M charges. But obviously, when you look at P2M, right, can we afford to have very high MDR to the merchant? Obviously cannot, right? Because this is the payment system which is used by the small merchants, the small kirana stores, and where the trade margins itself are in the 2%, 3% range. So there is no way that it is going to be a very high charge model. But at the same time, I personally believe that a small MDR, a very reasonable MDR, can be a very, very efficient revenue model to the entire ecosystem. Let me explain, Sanjay, why this is required. That today, and when any startups, any fintech ecosystem, right, which is actually leveraging UPI in a big way, right, they need to invest back onto the acquiring infrastructure, whether it's Paytm, PhonePe, GPay, or even for that matter, banks like SDFC, Axis, ICICI, SBI. So you need the funds for the entities to go back and deploy the QR codes at the merchant to make the change, integrate back with the merchant payment systems, or even for that online side, RazorPay, BillDesk, and the PayU, those kind of aggregators. The today that incentive is very much essential, right? Because that is what is going to drive the market expansion as the supply is concerned, right? In terms of having the ubiquitous merchant ecosystem available, and that's a painstaking job, Sanjay. You are aware fully that what it costs to get the merchant ecosystem active, service, solving their problems, building up support system for the merchant, and because they don't understand payment system into that level, right? So they have queries, they have questions, and you need a feet on street to support them. Second is the networks like NPCI, UPI, or maybe some of the other networks like Visa and Mastercard, and the customers bank, right? In that sense, to support all the customers to onboard onto digital platforms, to service them, to support the grievance redressal, the dispute resolution, those kind of things, and the app providers, whether it's banks or TPAPs like PhonePe, Google Pay, Paytm, and others, right? So to actually cater to the demand side, to get a lot of customers today, 250 million customers are working on UPI, and we believe that the actual potential is 500 million. So reasonable MDR actually takes care of this whole complex ecosystem, the ecosystem and the technology service providers operating onto that. I think the reasonable MDR is required, but MDR has been made zero. But now that with a lot of efforts have been put by the ecosystem to convince government that this is a very reasonable charge and this is required, and government also kindly agreed. I would personally thank FM and honorary FM and PM to agree to the ecosystem demand to provide some sort of a digital reimbursement in lieu of MDR. So I think it's getting there, Sanjay. I personally believe that we are standing up on an inflection point now, and I strongly believe that the moment we look at the future of digital payments, and I don't think we are very far away from billion a day from that standpoint.
Wow.
What our country deserves.
Amazing. So what are some of the new areas that we are going to see? We've been talking about what's come so far, but UPI started off with the combination of B2B and B2M. And of course, we would love to see it being used also for B2B payments and perhaps other recurring payments, things like problems which are sort of a big challenge here in India. And we do have the capability of mandates and stuff like that have been rolled out, but certainly not necessarily mainstream yet. So what are you looking at over the next, say, 24 months that consumers should be able to see, and opportunities perhaps for startups to partner to bring to market?
I feel AutoPay is at the stage when we started UPI. AutoPay is about 5 million mandates a month on UPI, but obviously the technical declines are very high, and it is in the stabilization process now, right? Because it's again a very unique architecture, unlike any other payment system, and it's a fairly complex digitally signed mandate stored by 5 parties together, right? So and I think it's a step towards programmable money in that sense. So I think mandates is something we are very bullish on, Sanjay. Obviously, it might take some more time, 6 months to a year to technically fully stabilize and give as superior service as UPI transactions, what you see. But I strongly believe that there is a 10x potential, right? So a country like this can easily have a 50 million monthly mandates on a UPI, and that is that will kind of change the way the recurring payments and some of the low ticket payments are made, right? And today our objective is to empower customer, right? Today, when you give a mandate to for example, any of the merchants, you don't understand how to cancel that mandate. But in UPI, we have empowered the customer to give full access to the mandate. He can add, update, delete at any point of time, unless obviously he has taken a loan. He can't cancel that mandate. But apart from that, the AutoPay, I think it's going to be a game changer, and very initial stage. I believe 10x growth is possible. RBI has released the low ticket guidelines, right? Below 200 rupees, 200 and below transactions. I think that is where NPCI will do some more work on seeing that how can we promote NCMC, right? The now we have launched, we have embedded the NCMC inside the RuPay and have a single card. So how do we drive NCMC and a low ticket volumes higher, right? That's going to be a big focus from our side. It goes without saying that the credit continues to be a focus. We are a credit starved country, and now that we have built up such a fantastic payment system growth, there is no reason why we could look at, while the credit card could well serve the top 50 million, I think from 50 to 250, I think some of the low ticket credit alternate mechanisms can be very, very powerful and can drive the consumptions and growth in economy in a big way. So I think these are some of the areas, Sanjay, we are working on, while we continue to fiddle around with blockchain and some of the other side, but obviously very early days on those.
Got it. Also, recently there was the e-RUPI, right? The prepaid vouchers on UPI that was launched specifically around, I guess, the vaccine use case, but it is really a generic platform. How do you see that potentially taking off over the next 12, 18 months?
See, I think the e-RUPI is when the government launched DBT, right? The government gives the cash back, gives the money back to the customer's account. Now the customer has a choice where to use that money, right? Today, the e-RUPI takes it to the next level. What government does is, government gives you a voucher and say that, this you can only use this voucher for this purpose. So even the end use, right? Instead of giving a hard money, the cash into his account or money into his account, the e-RUPI actually well controls the last mile usage as well, right? So it's like a person specific, purpose specific, end-to-end DBT solution. But as you're aware, Sanjay, it takes, we launched the direct benefit transfer program in 2012, in fact, early 2012. And by the time we started actually galvanizing a lot of volumes, it took 4 or 5 years in that sense, right? So e-RUPI is in that very early stage. It might take 2-3 years more to gain traction and attention. But I think it holds a lot of promise, Sanjay, right? Because what it does, it delivers a digital token in that sense to the beneficiary, and that token is very purpose specific in that sense to use it at specific level. And today, whether when you look at the whole decentralized finance, what is actually changing the game is the token and the smart contracts, and actually the e-RUPI actually is kind of emulates the token in a big way in that sense, right? Because it's a fully programmable. It gives you a lot of context while using it. It allows you to put conditions, validations at the last mile without them coming back to the central systems, right? In that sense, so I think it's a great technological advancement. Obviously, it might take some more time to gain traction and popularity, and which we are okay, Sanjay. I think we are patient enough. We have worked on many systems which initial years were like high and dry, but ultimately, if the payment system has a value and ecosystem adopts it, it takes time, obviously, like every other thing, but we believe very strongly about e-RUPI that it has a great potential.
So one last question, Dilip. As when I travel overseas, I often am envious to see, Alipay and WePay accepted here, and Chinese tourists can go and scan their QR code. And in India, we've all many of us forget the wallet at home, and we're still very comfortable now paying everywhere with a BHIM based, UPI based QR code, right? When do we see the opportunity for Indian tourists? Because we can take an Indian debit card and swipe it at a terminal, then it works fine. When will we start seeing, ability to go, say, to a Singapore or a Dubai or a London and just pull out my phone and pay with my favorite UPI app and not have to worry about currency exchange and all these hidden things that tourists should not have to worry about?
See, we have started the journey. We have now our fully owned subsidiary, an IPL, right? NPCI International, to look at, because we have NPCI has a huge mandate still have to complete. So the RBI, the board, everybody felt that there has to be a separate vehicle which is driving the globalization, and we have the new subsidiary which is actually engaging back to the many countries, engaging back to BIS, World Bank, IMF, and other developmental institutions. So Sanjay, when you look at the international cross-border payments, the one thing is very clear that, it takes time, right? Because the countries have different priorities and, as we speak, not many countries have actually built up the real-time payment rails, right? So I think out of 40, 60 countries where Indian tourist actually travels or Indian diaspora is present, many of them do not have the real-time payment systems, right? So I think the first thing what they're doing is, building up their own local payment system so that, they can actually connect back that real-time payment system to UPI to facilitate cross-border transfers, right? Cross-border transactions, transfers, and those kind of things. So I think we are poised at a very good point to look at the internationalization of the UPI, which kinds of solves many of the problems, as you rightly said. It gives virtually it converts every transaction as a dynamic currency conversion, right? It gives the charges upfront. It gives the it simplifies how the money is sent back to both sides. But obviously, it's a very cross-border is a very complex thing, and the both side regulators has to be aligned because there would be some changes in the regulations to be made. Unless the regulation changes are made, it's going to work very similar, creepy way the way it's working right now, right? The sender do not understand what's happening, the receiver do not understand what's happening, but there is an opportunity to solve. But obviously, a lot will depend on the collaboration of the regulators to make it very efficient cross-border merchant payments. But I think the NPCI International is doing a great job. They have reached out to many countries. Singapore is live, Sanjay, and while it may take now the travel will start, and it may take some more time to get the QR code acceptance in Singapore and UAE. But many countries we are studying, it's a time-consuming long-term goal, but we are patient enough to see that how can we be helpful to those countries to build the efficient rails with India, to build the efficient real-time platforms without depending on anybody else. Because it's very important, Sanjay, and that's what we keep talking to the countries, that don't depend on anybody. You will have to be self-sufficient as far as payment system is concerned, right? Critical payment system is concerned. And today, the India's approach to support them is not to make them dependent on India. India's approach to make them self-sufficient. India's approach is the public good approach of India works very well as a public good approach for the world. Prime Minister also spoke about it in one of the interviews that the world must leverage India's public good as the public good for the world. So efforts are on, Sanjay, but it's another 3 to 5 year journey.
So much exciting stuff happening in payments here in India, and I think we're all really grateful for NPCI being an organization that has really encouraged working both with incumbents as well as with tech entrepreneurs and startups. I'd like you to leave one parting thought for entrepreneurs in terms of what you see as potential opportunities that they should be investing their time and energy in. And appreciate your being on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. And the way I look at it, I think the founders, startups bring in amazing energy back to and the vibrancy back to the entire financial services ecosystem, and their role is very, very important. The way I look at it, some of the great startups, some of the great founders we have worked with, who have been very close to build the UPI success. So I think the one thing which startups and the fintechs could look at is trying to look at a long-term game, right? The financial services is a fairly sensitive area, right? It's a heavily regulated area, rightly so. So it's very important to build a right governance, right compliance, and right institutional model when you're actually working on a financial services area. So it's very important to keep a long-term view in mind and take actions which are very, because the financial services, the high trust is a core backbone of this whole industry. And the founders, while they are very good on technological side, they are very good on architectural side, but number of times they do not get the compliance, other things which are the information security, the privacy, and those kind of things very clearly. And they push the problem because of various other issues. They push the problems to the next stage. So I think all the founders who really want to make a large brand or a large success in the financial services ecosystem must start thinking about these other pillars which will help them to build a trust and a long-term game, such as compliance, the fraud risk management, the consumer awareness, the information security, and those kind of things.
Wonderful. Dilip, again, congratulations on an amazing decade at NPCI. I can't believe I'm saying that. It's been over a decade for you. But I really think, you put us in a position where the best is yet to come. I look forward to collaborating over the coming years and seeing some more amazing heights for NPCI. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.